Alrighty, everyone, I'm back again. 36 hours ago, roughly, I launched a video claiming that the CIA is behind all the media lies and that they are lying to us now about Russia and Ukraine for the particular purpose of getting the American people to be okay with economic devastation so that we can attempt to destroy the Ruskies through economic sanctions, which they aren't going to work, but because these people are too stupid to know economics, they don't understand that it won't work. But this is, I believe, their plan. So today I've actually since then I've come across so much information that supports the assertions I made in my last video of who is lying to you through the media and why, that I've decided to make another video with all the information I found over the last day and a half. So if you haven't seen that video, you should probably watch it. This is going to be a little bit disjointed if you haven't seen that one first. And the information here is not, I'm not going to try to tie it all together. I'm just going to kind of smash it rapid fire so that you can just use it to understand that my previous assertion, I believe, is strongly supported. Firstly, is probably one of the strongest proofs that Ukrainians are the human rights violators. We got a booklet with 426 pages of violations by the Ukrainian army between the times of 2017 and 2020. I will provide a link in the description below. Now, next in that booklet on page 66, you have a picture of the Azov battalion with 3 flags in the background. The one on the far left is the NATO flag. The one in the middle is the Azov battalion flag, and the one on the right is a Nazi flag. So my assertion that the Azov battalion is kind of like those secret Nazi NATO armies that infests Europe and South America because of operations Condor and Gladio seems pretty likely at this point. Next, Scott Ritter was not the only person that was temporarily banned on Twitter because they challenged the Buka story. This actually happened to 3 other journalists that I found. I only managed to take a screenshot of one of them, but this was a widespread thing on Twitter to crack down specifically on that story, which definitely shows the involvement of the U.S. intelligence being in a micromanaging aspect regarding the censorship on media platforms. Also, I did want to mention in the Buka story, if you see the bodies on the ground here, if you really look at this picture, the spaces between them are the same. It's a very symmetrical picture with the center body being offset to the side about 1.5 feet, 2 feet. This is clearly a staged event. There's no blood pools below them. The bodies were dragged here, and there are actual videos of the Azov battalion dragging bodies around. But even if you didn't know that, or even if those videos didn't exist, this is clearly a staged event. You can tell because it's a linear pattern. You know, there's the distance between the two. The bodies are all the same. Like I said before, the middle one is slightly off to the side, which actually turns it into a circular type of show from like a media standpoint, where the camera is seeing the entire view. It's clearly a setup that this is what you would do if you were designing a war scene for a movie. And the fact that there's people just standing around not even caring about the dead bodies, it's like, clearly this is insane to think that this is not staged. And moving on, one of the things I mentioned was that the CIA was using the same tactic it did during COVID, which is to just continually pump out so much propaganda that it kind of inundates the general populace. And there's never an investigation. Basically every single one of the mainstream media news outlets is in on the propaganda. They're part of the CIA.
Can you do this with responsible reporters?
Yes, the Church Committee brought it out in 1975, and then Woodward and Bernstein put an article in Rolling Stone a couple of years later. 400 journalists cooperating with the CIA, including some of the biggest names in the business, to consciously introduce the stories into the press.
So obviously they've done this before. They did this in the Cuban War. They did it in the Afghan War. They did it in pretty much every war. Otherwise they would never get away with any of this stuff. So they're inundating everyone with just this nuts propaganda. All of the so-called reliable sources are all in on it. They're all working for the CIA. And by all, I mean vast majority, maybe not every single person, but enough that you're basically going to get that as a result. Anyway, the most recent propaganda out of the CIA was a missile strike that hit a train station in the Donbass. They claimed it was the Russians, but basically the missile, the serial number was released. They had some media on the ground, and the media ended up accidentally releasing photos that included the serial number. That serial number was then checked against serial numbers that were already released about Ukrainian missiles, and that has been shown to be a Ukrainian missile that hit that target. Moreover, Alexander Christoforou comes to the same result because the type of the missile used is a Ukrainian missile.
So I think there's no doubt about it that, in my opinion, if it's a Tochka U, we know who did it. If it was an Iskander, it would mean Russia did it, absolutely. No doubt about that. Iskander, Russia, Tochka, Ukraine. And we all know it's a Tochka now. So,
and now there's further proof that's come out from the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry that basically they've hardened their position that they will not negotiate with Russia. They've pulled out of negotiations and they will not come to a peaceful agreement. As I said, that NATO will not allow them to, so that we can continue our strategy.
One of Zelensky's top advisors, Mikhail Podolyak, came out with statements saying that a ceasefire and a truce with Russia, and I quote, is meaningless. That was his quote, his meaningless. He said, "We won't agree to a Minsk III or a Budapest II. It's all pointless." Podolyak also said Ukraine is not interested in a temporary truce with Russia, and it's important to push through such conditions that would not allow Russia to even think of attacking Ukraine or crossing its borders. So I read his statement, and it's clear as day to me that we're not going to get a ceasefire. At least if you read his statement, and he's a top advisor of Zelensky. So
it's pretty clear that Ukraine is not deciding their own foreign policy. Ukraine cannot surrender. If you actually know a little bit about what's going on there, you know that President Zelensky is actually like a sociopath billionaire. Both his money and his life are in the hands of the West, the CIA, which basically have him as a hostage. So he's a hostage president. He can't surrender unless NATO tells him he's okay to, and they won't do it until they believe that Russia has bent the knee to them. Going back to Bucha for a minute, during the time when the New York Times came out to try to defend the ridiculous story that was made about the Russians killing people in Bucha when they weren't even there. The New York Times tried to pretend like it happened weeks ago when, based off of their, satellite imagery or whatever. Now, during this time, when people tried to check them, to check the New York Times satellite imagery, all other satellite images of that area at that time were taken off the internet so that people could not find them. Which shows the vast scope and scale of the power of the people doing the censorship. They have the ability to bully companies that can launch satellites into outer space. That's pretty significant. There are very few things on groups of people on the planet that can manage that.
Да, у нас были у нас военные на мой призыв о том, что были конвенции Гаагская и Женевская, я просил, чтобы от больницы не отошли. Вот было сказано, это война. Вот на нашей территории стояли танки, за территорией стояли пушки и грады. Ну вот мы сейчас посмотрим, чему.
And again, this is just one more example, but just another example of the Azov battalion and the Ukrainian armed forces going in, taking over civilian structures, using civilians as human shields, and then when they are bombed or shelled, in order for the Russians to advance, to destroy tanks and artillery weapons that are on civilian grounds, in order to basically, which is a necessity if you're engaging with these people. And then at the end of it, they blame the Russians for war crimes when they're the ones who have broken the Geneva Convention and the Hague Accords, and they've done so at their cost of their own civilians, their own citizens' lives. Now, on another front, Ian Coomer, in this very interesting article, goes through how the common belief that both sides lie and everyone's lying is actually not true in this war, because the Russian Ministry of Defense has not lied a single time. Not a single one of their statements has been proven false since the beginning of this operation. So the lies are only coming from one side. That is the NATO side of things. Now, he actually trained in the same places that NATO soldiers train, and he actually went through the course that they're supposed to go through in order to learn how to release information so that they don't ever release false or verifiably false information. And he testifies that they're not following protocols. They're just completely and flagrantly violating NATO protocols involving information distribution, and they're doing so for the purpose of propagandizing the public. The Russian Ministry of Defense, on the other hand, has not lied or said a single false thing since the beginning of this operation in Ukraine.
Now, we have some interesting news, some very interesting news, and that has to do with the mercenaries, well, what I think are mercenaries or NATO soldiers who are stuck in Mariupol. And we have a statement from the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, I've said in many videos, when the Russian Ministry of Defense makes statements, they should be believed, I think. That's just my opinion. I think they're very, very careful. From day one, the Ministry of Defense was instructed to be very careful with the statements that they make, because everything that they say is going to be scrutinized. I mean, it's going to be under the microscope, and they've been directed to only make statements after they've been double, triple, quadruple checked.
So as much as people don't want to hear it, there is a reliable official source, and that is the Russian Ministry of Defense. Yeah. And they're now claiming that there are NATO forces, or at least there are there are people within the Azovstal building in Mariupol that have speak 6 different languages that are not Ukrainian or Russian, mostly from European countries. Pretty much tells you that there's a coalition of NATO forces inside of the Azovstal that have been training the Nazi Azov battalion. Again, showing another evidence that that NATO is the one behind the Azov battalion, and they're the one behind the war. And came across an interesting article from the Daily Telegraph. Russia set to attack Lugansk. It's like they don't know anything about the current conflict. It's literal insanity. Lugansk was being invaded by the Ukraine. We went over that in several videos. And they literally requested Russia to intervene and save them from the Ukrainians, who had been destroying them with artillery shells and had an invasion force of 60 to 80,000 troops on the border. Those troops are now surrounded. But now that the attention is off of Kiev, because Russia has withdrawn from surrounding Kiev, they had been there only to keep the Ukrainian forces from joining the east. That way they could keep the ones in the east bottled up. Now that they're moving away from that, there's some really weird stories coming out of the media about the eastern Ukraine, and they have no clue what's going on. They don't even understand the reason for the conflict at all. It's like they live in a different universe. Anyway, here is a video of the invasion of Lugansk by Russia. Anyway, that's from a channel of someone named Eva Bartlett. I'll put a link to that video in the description. And then just to finish up, I'm going to leave you with a video of what that place looked like before the Russians invaded it violently.
It seems divided into
And unlike the Twitter mob, in this case, it is the populations of those places standing by their monuments, which they put up to remember what the Ukrainian Azov Battalion and the Ukrainian Nazi political structure has done to them over the last 10 years. Russia clearly had a reason to come in and save these people. And I'm going to stand by my belief that President Putin is a hero of the Russian people, whether they're living in Russia or living in Ukraine.